The ambient clinking of heavy sterling silver against fine bone china always carried a distinct, predatory rhythm inside the private dining room of the Valley's most exclusive country club. The air was thick with the heavy, suffocating sense of expensive aged scotch, melted candle wax, and the quiet, structural arrogance of generational wealth that had never known the concept of a boundary. I sat perfectly still at the far end of the long, linen-draped table, my fingers lightly resting against the stem of a water glass as I watched the two women opposite me execute a silent, devastating appraisal. Patricia Whitmore adjusted the heavy ropes of South Sea pearls cascading down her designer silk blouse, her eyes narrowing into cold, razor-sharp slits as she looked at my simple, unbranded jersey dress. Beside her sat her 28-year-old daughter, Vivian, whose manicured fingers were frantically typing on her smartphone while her lips curled into a familiar, patronizing sneer of pure amusement. They were mentally calculating my net worth down to the exact penny, using the surface markers of my existence to construct a narrative of absolute financial inferiority. To them, 32-year-old Ella Graham was nothing more than a convenient, low-level administrative assistant, a quiet non-entity who had somehow managed to capture the attention of Patricia's golden child son, Marcus. I could see the numbers scrolling behind Patricia's cold, porcelain-veneered smile as she took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal wine goblet. She had already checked the vehicle logs of the country club's valet parking, discovering that I had arrived behind the wheel of a faded, 12-year-old silver Subaru with a scratched bumper. She had noted the complete lack of designer logos on my handbag, the absence of glistening diamonds on my earlobes, and the fact that my hands bore the clean, unadorned simplicity of someone who worked for a living. In the high society registry of the Whitmore family, I had been permanently branded as the help, an unfortunate, lower-class variable who was entirely out of her depth in a room filled with real estate magnates. It is always fascinating to observe how quickly an elite status can blind people to the absolute reality standing directly in front of their faces, rendering them completely vulnerable to their own assumptions. Vivian set her phone down on the table with a sharp, echoing click, leaning forward as she tossed her highlighted hair over her shoulder with an calculated air of supreme boredom. Marcus tells us you manage the scheduling and basic data entry for the regional logistics office downtown, Ella, Vivian said, her tone dripping with a synthetic, weaponized sweetness. It must be so exhausting dealing with those columns of shipping numbers all day just to clear a standard monthly rent check in the city. I just hope you understand that our family operates on an entirely different structural tier, and Marcus's partners expect a companion who brings substantial corporate equity to the table. Patricia offered a low, theatrical chuckle of agreement, adjusting her heavy gold bracelets with an unyielding arrogance that had once terrorized the local social committees. My daughter is simply being realistic, Ella, my mother-in-law-to-be chimed in, her eyes locking onto my serene face with a chilling, predatory intensity. The Whitmore Premier car dealerships are a historic pillar of this region's economy, and we have spent decades cultivating an image of absolute luxury and financial perfection. We tolerate Marcus's little romantic diversions, of course, but a marriage in our circle is an executive merger of assets, not a charity project for a nameless public servant. I didn't flinch, and I didn't let a single flicker of human emotion breach the calm, stoic mask of my face, because my life was built on a foundation of data, not social validation. I simply offered a polite, professional smile, taking a slow sip of my water while the two women exchanged a subtle, triumphant glance that told them they had successfully put me in my place. They believed they had executed the perfect psychological execution of an undercover outsider. They had absolutely no idea that their entire worldview was about to be violently dismantled by the very data they despised. The spectacular financial plot twist hidden beneath my faded Subaru and unbranded clothing was a masterpiece of stealth wealth that I had guarded with absolute, mechanical precision. While I maintained the quiet profile of a modest administrative assistant to keep my life entirely free of superficial parasites, my actual professional reality was operating on an elite global scale. I was a senior cloud systems tech architect for an international cybersecurity conglomerate, an elite specialist whose code protected the structural integrity of major banking mainframes across Europe. My monthly consulting retainer alone pulled in exactly $37,000, deposited directly into a private corporate treasury that normal banking audits could never surface. But that monthly salary was a mere drop of water compared to the vast, hidden ocean of wealth that anchored my identity deep within the region's history. I was the sole primary beneficiary and absolute owner of a multi-million-dollar inheritance trust left to me by my late maternal grandmother, Margaret Graham. Margaret Graham had been a legendary force in the shipping industry, a woman of immense intellect who had built a vast portfolio of commercial real estate and logistics networks before her passing. She had trained me from my youth to understand that true power does not preen in designer logos, wave expensive watch faces, or scream for the attention of a country club ballroom. True wealth is a silent, unyielding gravity, an invisible force that commands the room from the shadows while letting the loud and insecure expose their own vulnerabilities on the stage. I drove that 12-year-old Subaru because the engine was mathematically flawless, and I wore unbranded clothing because my self-worth was not a commodity to be leased from a luxury fashion house. I had entered Marcus's world as a simple test, a deliberate deployment of anonymity to see if the man who swore he loved me was capable of seeing the woman beneath the surface of her financial profile. But as the weeks of our engagement unfolded, I began to deploy a far more specific, clinical protocol that my grandmother had taught me before she closed her eyes for the last time. Margaret Graham always told me, "Ella, before you ever sign a contract or bind your life to a family, you must execute the safety test. You must audit their foundations when they think you are too blind to look." A truly successful family welcomes an audit, but a family built on an illusion of wealth will always leave a trail of desperate, frantic numbers in their wake. Using my priority administrative credentials and my advanced forensic financial software, I initiated a deep, subterranean digital sweep of the Whitmore car dealership's corporate ledgers. What I discovered beneath the glossy, high-society surface of their premier showrooms was a structural collapse so severe it read like a multi-million-dollar corporate execution. The Whitmore dealership empire was a hollowed-out shell, a house of cards drowning in massive floor-plan interest rates and defaulting commercial loans. They were weeks away from a total, catastrophic termination of their primary franchise agreements due to a complete failure to meet their corporate manufacturing capitalization requirements. But the most devastating segment of the forensic audit trail didn't point to my father-in-law's outdated business management style. The data tokens and master digital signatures revealed that Vivian Whitmore had been actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the dealership's escrow accounts over a 24-month timeline. She had established a fraudulent network of dummy shell companies, siphoning the customer deposit funds to finance her private luxury travel, her designer clothing sprees, and her high-end lifestyle. She was actively robbing her own father's dying business to maintain the illusion of her country club status, fully confident that the family's elite legal counsel would shield her from any exposure. I sat in the quiet dark of my private home office, watching the fraudulent transactions stream across my high-definition monitors with an absolute, freezing precision. The very women who had branded me as the help during our formal dinner were currently floating on an ocean of stolen liquidity, completely blind to the fact that their survival depended on a miracle. The explosive climax of their desperation was scheduled to unfold at the magnificent engagement party they had organized at a luxury historic estate downtown. They had spent thousands of dollars they did not possess to mount an ostentatious, high-stakes spectacle, converting the estate's grand ballroom into a theater of unearned opulence. As I walked into the venue wearing a simple, elegant vintage white dress, the room was a blurred tapestry of flashing cameras, floral arrangements, and hundreds of the city's wealthiest investors. Marcus approached me near the grand ice sculpture, his face flushed with an unstable mixture of premium alcohol and a frantic, hidden anxiety that he was struggling to mask. He looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but his eyes were darting continuously toward the VIP lounge where a group of wealthy corporate venture capitalists were standing. He slipped a velvet box from his pocket, pulling out a diamond engagement ring that he had aggressively forced onto my finger before the formal announcements began. Even under the dim, romantic lighting of the ballroom, my forensic eye could instantly see that the central stone was a subpar, cloudy diamond, a cheap, low-grade asset that had been heavily discounted by a local broker. Marcus leaned in, his breath smelling of fine bourbon, his voice carrying a weak, unfaithful whisper that made my skin crawl with an intense, calculated disgust. "We need to make this look absolutely perfect tonight, Ella," Marcus muttered, his hand gripping my waist with a desperate, heavy pressure. "My parents are going to announce our formal union on the stage in a few minutes, and I need you to act completely ecstatic when the cameras flash. It's an important milestone for our family's corporate alignment, and it will ensure our positions are fully secured for the upcoming fiscal quarter." What Marcus didn't realize was that my private security team had already intercepted his personal encrypted digital communications earlier that afternoon. The data revealed a dark, sickening layer of marital deception that completely erased any remaining shred of my human patience for the Whitmore bloodline. Marcus wasn't just attempting a weak, unfaithful proposal to build a life with me. He had been actively cheating on me for 6 months with his wealthy ex-girlfriend, Alexandra Castellano. Alexandra Castellano was the sole heiress to the Castellano Investment Network, a powerful venture capital group that held the primary debt leverage over the Whitmore dealerships. Marcus and his mother, Patricia, had orchestrated a secret, traitorous corporate plot behind my back, using my simple profile as a temporary placeholder to delay the bank foreclosures. Marcus was planning to execute a forced corporate merger with the Castellano network immediately after our engagement party, dumping me with a cold, legal settlement while he ran away with Alexandra's capital. They were using my presence as an empty, disposable marketing tool to trick the secondary investors into believing the Whitmore empire was still stable and expanding. They believed that because I was a quiet, isolated administrative assistant, I would simply endure the public humiliation, swallow my tears, and fade into the background when the legal execution landed. The venue coordinator dimmed the grand chandeliers, directing the sharp, blinding white spotlights directly toward the main stage where my father-in-law stood holding a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the future of the Whitmore legacy," the patriarch announced, his voice booming through the silent, reverent ballroom. "We are proud to welcome Ella Graham into our family lineage, a union that signifies the steady, traditional values that have made our commercial dealerships a historic success." The crowd erupted into a polite storm of applause, and Patricia elegantly stepped forward, waving her hand to signal me to ascend the steps and join her son under the bright lights. I walked up the wooden stairs with a slow, deliberate grace, my posture entirely upright, my expression carrying a strange, chilling peace that made the venue coordinator instantly freeze. As Marcus reached out his hand to pull me toward the center microphone, my fingers moved with the lightning-fast precision of a tech architect executing a system-wide digital shutdown. Instead of accepting his hand, I calmly bypassed him, stepped directly up to the primary podium, and snatched the microphone from my father-in-law's loose grip. The room fell into a sudden, suffocating silence as the 200 elite high society guests realized that the quiet, unbranded girl was altering the script of the evening. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice smooth, deep, and carrying an immense, crystalline resonance that echoed through the silent rafters of the estate. "I appreciate the beautiful hospitality the Whitmore family has displayed tonight, but before we toast to any future unions, there is a foundational corporate disclosure that requires your immediate attention." Patricia's face instantly twisted into a mask of blinding, white-hot fury, her diamonds shaking as she stormed toward the podium to violently grab the microphone from my hands. "Silence this girl immediately," Patricia hissed, her voice cracking under the sudden weight of her panic as she looked for the security detail. "She is completely unhinged. She is just a low-level assistant throwing a hysterical tantrum." I didn't step back, and I didn't raise my pitch. I simply tapped a single command code into the encrypted satellite terminal resting inside my small clutch purse. In that single, cinematic second, the massive high-definition projector screens lining the ballroom walls violently flashed from a loop of family photographs into a series of cold, forensic financial ledgers. The monitors displayed the certified bank foreclosure alerts, the defaulting commercial loan balances, and the official legal termination notices from the automotive manufacturing conglomerates. The crowd gasped in absolute horror as the raw, desperate corporate bankruptcy of the Whitmore empire was laid bare in high-resolution detail before the city's most powerful venture capitalists. But the true, spectacular public karma sequence reached its peak when the next slide loaded onto the massive screens, revealing the embezzlement tracking files. The screen displayed the exact transactional routing numbers, the forged digital signatures, and the dummy shell corporations that Vivian Whitmore had used to siphon hundreds of thousands from her father's escrow lines. Vivian let out a sharp, horrified shriek, her smartphone slipping from her hands and smashing face down onto the marble floor as the color completely drained from her face. "Mom, shut it down. Shut the servers off." Vivian screamed, her weaponized confidence completely dissolving into a frantic, desperate weeping as the guests began to openly look at her with expressions of pure disgust. Marcus stepped forward, his face a grotesque shade of pale ash as he tried to block the screen with his body, his voice shaking with a pathetic, terrifying desperation. "Ella, please stop this. You are completely destroying our lives over a simple misunderstanding. We can fix the financial accounts privately," he pleaded, his hands reaching for my dress. "The accounts cannot be fixed, Marcus, because your family no longer possesses any legal standing in this market," I said into the microphone, my words cutting through his panic like an iron gate locking them out forever. "You spent the last 6 months orchestrating a secret corporate merger with the Castellano Investment Network to save your dying dealerships while cheating on me behind my back. But you made a fatal, arrogant mistake by forgetting to verify who actually holds the primary debt leverage over your family's assets. 2 weeks ago, using the private corporate treasury of the Margaret Graham estate and my family ally, Richard Hartley, I quietly bought out the entire Castellano Investment Network in cash. I am the sole primary lien holder of your dealerships, your real estate deeds, and the very ground this country club is built upon, and I have officially filed the papers to execute a total asset liquidation." I reached down to my finger, violently sliding the subpar, cloudy diamond engagement ring from my hand, and dropped it carelessly into Marcus's open, trembling palm. "Here is your cloudy stone back, Marcus," I whispered, the microphone capturing every syllable with a chilling clarity. "You can use it to pay the first hour of your sister's criminal defense attorney bills." I turned around without waiting for a single reply, walking down the center aisle of the grand ballroom while the state fraud investigators, whom my legal team had quietly summoned, stepped through the double doors. The elite high society guests parted like the Red Sea, their faces filled with an absolute, breathless awe as the quiet administrative assistant walked out of the venue as the sovereign owner of the empire. The total, satisfying downfall of the Whitmore empire descended upon their household over the next several months with the unstoppable velocity of a mathematical law. Because the forensic data trail of Vivian's embezzlement and the corporate fraud was completely airtight, the automotive manufacturing conglomerates instantly terminated their franchise agreements with the Whitmore showrooms. The local dealerships were stripped of their luxury branding, their inventory was repossessed by corporate transport crews in broad daylight, and the historic showrooms were closed down behind heavy security seals. My father-in-law was forced to declare total, unconditional corporate bankruptcy, his name permanently flagged in every financial registry across the nation as a high-risk liability. The grand suburban mansion they lived in was liquidated at a public auction to pay back the siphoned customer deposits, leaving Patricia and her family completely penniless and socially ruined. Vivian was forced to sign a binding, multi-year plea agreement with the state prosecutors, trading her luxury travel for a lengthy period of federal probation and mandatory public service hours. Marcus's high society real estate connections vanished overnight, his elite country club peers completely blacklisting him from their circles as a toxic traitor who had been outmaneuvered by his own undercover target. I watched their total collapse from a safe distance, remaining completely quiet as I relocated my primary architectural operations to a private, sun-filled coastal estate. My new home featured massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that looked out over the rolling, peaceful currents of the ocean, a sanctuary filled with fresh flowers, beautiful literature, and pure serenity. There were no arrogant mothers-in-law calculating my net worth over dinner plates, and there were no unfaithful partners attempting to use my life as a disposable corporate asset. I spent my mornings walking along the quiet shoreline, the cool sea wind rushing past my face, a profound, permanent sense of total liberation settled deep into my soul. I had turned the coldest high society snobbery into a spectacular display of pure human karma, completely owning my life and my grandmother's legacy on my own terms. If you are listening to this story right now and you are the person whose silence, hard work, or simple lifestyle has been used as a target for the arrogance of others, hear me clearly. Your value is never defined by the surface calculations of people who lease their self-worth from a luxury fashion house or a social registry. Strength does not mean enduring emotional deception, public humiliation, or corporate exploitation for the sake of a false connection that only serves the parasites in your life. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade character for status, and you begin to use your own intellect to establish unbreakable boundaries around your destiny. My public karma reveal was a beautiful, flawless execution of pure financial strategy that permanently restored justice to my grandmother's legacy. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to sleep deeply every single night with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic location defined by an elite surname, a country club membership, or the toxic obligation to minimize your brilliance to make insecure people feel safe. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your sacrifices are genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.